Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to make breaking glass effect in Unity. What we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to make two models of a window, one that's unbroken and one broken. How we're going to do this is we have here the unbroken window. At the point of collision of this ball and this window is going to be destroyed, and in its position there's going to be an instantiation of a pre-modeled cut apart version of this model. And using the physics system of Unity, we can make a effect that looks a bit like a breaking glass. So let's see this example right here. That looks pretty cool, right? As you can see, the first ball that hits the glass window doesn't hit it hard enough for it to break, but the second ball does, so it'll break apart into these little pieces. This whole scene you can download, check out the link below of this video, and there you can find this whole scene, so you can start from this part on. But for this tutorial we're going to do this step by step. Let's start by going over to our modeler. As you can see here, I have two versions of the glass. One window is unbroken and one is broken. First, I created this cube and I saved it as an FBX. Then, I started using a knife tool and cutting through this mesh to create little pieces. Let's go over to our side view, take the knife tool, and I will just cut through the mesh here. Alright. Go over to our 3D view. As you can see, I've cut through the mesh here. And you can separate these parts and you'll get the idea that I've got here. All these different separated parts. Let's move them back into their position. You'll save this whole object with all these little pieces inside as a new FBX, as the broken window, and then you'll import them into Unity. Let me first remove these objects here. We can start from the beginning. So inside our folder meshes, I've got the broken glass plate. As you can see, it contains all the little pieces that we made. And the unbroken glass, which is just a cube. Now what you want to remember is to tap on generate colliders. So Unity will make a mesh collider around the object that you're importing. If you hit apply, then you'll see that for all these objects there are colliders also. So we'll start by dragging out our whole glass plate onto the scene. Let me turn this around. Move this into position. Just around here. Alright. As you can see, it already has a mesh collider attached to it. And we want to add a little bit more nice material. So I'm going to my materials folder and selecting my pre-made material glass. What I did, I chose for the material transparent diffuse. So if I adjust the color and the opacity of it, it will affect the material. So let's drag and drop this onto the object, and there we have it. The next thing we want to do is we want to go to our broken glass, drop it into a scene view, move this a little bit up, so we can make a prefab of this object. So we can instantiate it at the point where this glass has to be broken. So let's start by giving this a little bit better texture. select all your little pieces, go to the materials folder and drag and drop this here, because I've got all the pieces selected, so this will be applied to all the objects that I selected. There you go. Now that we've got our material going, the next thing we need to do is we gotta give all these different pieces their own rigid body, so they can be affected by the physics system of Unity. So what we're doing, we're selecting all the objects again, going over to Component, Physics, Rigid Body. Now all these objects have their own rigid body. You can play around with the mass of it, but I'll just keep it to default. And of course they have to use gravity. Now this prefab is done, so we're gonna make a prefab of it. Create prefab, and let's call this broken glass. Now just select the whole object and drag and drop this into the prefab, and there we have our prefab. There's just one thing I forgot to do to set up in the prefab, and that is to adjust its physics material. So let's head over to my folder of physics materials, and I've already made here a glass break physics material. We're gonna apply this to every little broken piece of the glass. I've put here the dynamic friction and static friction to 0.4. What this friction does is it says how fast the object, when it hits the floor, will come to an end. So if this is set to 0, it will feel like ice, and if it's set to 1, it'll feel like it's a brick of stone. So I've put it somewhere in the middle. And the bounciness is, when it's set to 0, it'll hit the floor and be dead, and when it's set to 1, it'll bounce without loss of any energy. So I want to keep all these pretty much in the middle. Now when I go to all my pieces again, I will select my physics material, glass break, and I will drag and drop this into the mesh collider material, let go of the mouse, and now I'm all set up. So I will repeat my process of drag and drop this into the prefab, and now I am done. We're almost done to start with coding this script, but first I'm going to remove this object because I've already made a prefab of it, and into my scene I'm going to make a ball object. So let's go to game object, create other, sphere. Let's put its position to 0, and it's set to 0, and its y to somewhere around here. Select the glass object, and I'm gonna center it too, so the ball falls into the center of the glass. I could give the ball its own material, and of course the ball also needs a rigid body because we want the ball to fall into the glass. So I'm going to component, physics, rigid body, and it'll fall down now, because if I play this, then the ball falls onto the glass and nothing happens. Okay, now comes the fun part. We're going to script this thing. So I'm heading over to my folder scripts, and I've already made a new script, C#, and I called it break. So let's open this script. There you go. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So what I did, I removed the update and the start function already. So I'm starting with just mono behavior inside the class break. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have this broken object, the prefab, being instantiated. So we need a public transform. So I'm starting off with writing a public transform, and I'll call it broken object. So that's what we'll need. And the next thing we know that we need is we want to make a collision. We want the ball to hit the broken glass. So we'll start with a void on collision enter. And it is a collision, and we'll call this collision. Oops. So the next thing we want to check is to see if the object colliding with the glass has enough magnitude to break the glass, because we don't want a ball falling really slow to break the glass, but it has to fall at a certain speed. So we'll start by making another if statement, and I'll say the collision, so anything that'll collide with this object, dot its relative velocity, dot its magnitude. If it's greater than, you could say here some number, I say 12, then something else happens. I'd like to make a habit of not just writing here hard-coded the variables in, but I'll make a new variable for that. So I'll make a public float, and I'll call this magnitude call. So what I can do here is I can replace this with magnitude call. I actually made a little typo here, because this has to be a capital. And the next thing we're going to do is inside the if statement, we're going to destroy our object and instantiate at its position and rotation and its scale the new broken glass. So we'll start off with destroy our game object, and we'll instantiate our broken object. And here we can define its position and rotation, which we'll get from this object transform dot position and its transform dot rotation. Now we'll also need to inherit the local scale of the object, so we'll say broken object dot its local scale is transform dot local scale. Okay, let's save the script and let's see what we've got so far. We're gonna drag and drop this script onto our glass plate. Our broken object is still empty here, so we have to go to our prefabs folder, get our broken glass window and drop it into this transform. I'll set the magnitude, well, let's keep it at 0 for now. And so if this ball hits this glass window, it should break. Let's see if it works. As you can see, yeah, it'll work, but it's not the effect that we want to go for. Because now if it just hits the object, it'll just fall down, and this is not a really good effect. So what we want to do is we want to create a overlap sphere of the physics system here at the point of impact at a certain radius to affect these different parts around the ball of impact, and then give it a certain amount of power to create a real splatter effect. So back into our C# script, we will make inside the if statement a new vector tree, which I'm calling explosion position, which is basically just the transform dot position. So now what we need to do is we need to make an array of colliders and make a overlap sphere at the point of impact, and all the objects that it hits are going to be put inside of the array. So I'm going to make an array of colliders, and I'll put the brackets behind it so Unity knows that it is a array, and I'll call this colliders. And what it is it's using the physics system of Unity, and in here we can give it all kinds of stuff. What we need to have is make an overlap sphere. So I'll select that, and then what I can do is I can give its position and its radius. That's why I created earlier the vector tree of explosion pos. So I can put here the position, and here it asks me for the radius. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new float, which is called radius, and I'll just type in here radius. The final thing we have to do is to check for this collider array by making a for each loop to check which colliders are in there and add an explosion force to it. So what I'll do here is I'll start off with a for each loop. I'll open it. It's about the collider, and I can just give it here in any name that I want. So I'll call it hit in the array of colliders. So what this does is it's going to make a loop of checking for every collider that is in the array colliders. Now I'll close this one. And inside here I want to make an extra check if the collider in there does really have a rigid body. Because if it doesn't have a rigid body, then what I'm going to do with the explosion force, you have to have a rigid body for it. And if there wouldn't be a rigid body, then Unity would give a error. So this is just a check. So if hit dot rigid body, so if it has the component of a rigid body, then we're going to make an add explosion force. So for every hit, this is the object of the collider dot rigid body dot add explosion force. This is a really powerful tool in which you can make explosions of like bombs exploding and whole surrounding going away. And now I'm going to try to make a glass break with this. So first we want to do is make the explosion force, and I want to give it a certain power. So I will make a new float called power that I can adjust in Unity itself, in the inspector. So I'll go out here for power, and I want to multiply it by its magnitude that it's been hit by. So I will do actually this thing again. So collision dot relative velocity dot magnitude. Let me make this a little bit smaller. And then we have to declare the position, and the position is the explosion pos that we already declared, and now we can give its radius. Well, we've already got that one, so I'll just say radius, radius. And now we can give a fourth setting, and it's an upwards modifier. So what that'll do is it gives, at the point of impact, it can give a little bit of upwards power to the object that's been hit. And I will create another float for that one, call it upwards, and I'll put down here upwards. Put a semicolon, and that's the end of our script. So we'll save this. Let's head over to our Unity, and we'll see all the different variables here. So our let's start by putting this upwards to 3. I'll make the power 10 for now. The radius, let's make it about 4, and its magnitude, collision at, set it at 10. Let's see what this does. Nothing happens. Okay, so probably the magnitude of this ball is not falling fast enough, so let's set it a little bit higher. Let's try it again. Yep, there it goes. It breaks. So now it's just playing around with the variables to see what makes the best effect. What we could do is here see the radius, because that's the radius of the sphere collider, the overlap sphere that is instantiated at the point of impact. If I make that really small, and you'll see that only a few glasses are getting an add explosion force. So if I'll make this like 0.5, and I'll run it again, then you see only these few center points get an add explosion force, and the rest is just falling down. So let's try something like 2. So what we want is we want to affect the whole glass. So I'll put it back to 4, and we can adjust its power too. So if I'll make this like 1, you see it gives really a little bit of power. But if I put it up to like, well, let's go crazy, put it up to 100. That would be the explosion of a bomb, not for a ball hitting a glass window. But it's fun. So put it back to something like I think this 10 was pretty good. If I put this upward to 0, by the way, you'll see what happens. Then it'll fall really down, and the upwards variable gives it a little jump in the air. So what that does is it rotates the glass a little bit by point of impact. Maybe this is a little bit too much, but maybe if I set it to 1. Maybe just a little bit less. Well, as you can see, it's quite fun to play around with. But this comes to the end of my tutorial, and I hope you learned something and liked this tutorial. This actually was my first one, so I hope you enjoyed it, and check back later for more tutorials.